Okay, so it's a little bit overdue. It released late 2017, but I thought it'd be good to take a look at Adobe Dimension. Hey guys, you're watching Dansky, the place to be to develop your creative skills, and in this tutorial we're going to jump into Adobe Dimension, take a look at some of the tools. It's going to be like an overview video, just going around everything, and then I'm going to show you how you can create a 3D product, add some lighting, some graphics, all that good stuff. So if you've never heard of Adobe Dimension, essentially it's a really easy to use piece of software for creating 3D mockups of products, adding your graphics, and then adding that into a scene. You don't really need any 3D experience. My 3D experience is pretty limited to say the least, and I can use Adobe Dimension just fine, he says. So hopefully this tutorial all goes to plan. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump into it and we'll kind of take a look around. So here you can see I'm on the welcome screen. We can take a tour, we can take a tutorial, and we can discover some Adobe stock assets. If you don't know, you can download more assets for this from Adobe stock. So lots of useful stuff there, and we can open a document or create a new one. Of course, we are going to create a new one. So let's go and click that. And we get a blank document, and we can adjust our canvas size. If you'd like to go for something higher resolution, from the properties panel here on the right, you can adjust the resolution, you can turn the grid on or off. Now, if I go down to the bottom left corner, you can see this little box icon. This is our content, and I can click this and it just shows or hides the content. So that's this entire panel here. And what we can do is we can filter these out by models. So these are the 3D models. And of course you can download more from Adobe stock if you like. We have the materials, the next one along. So you can see lots of cool different materials, metal, plastic, wax, aluminium, brass, gold. Along from there, we have different types of lighting, which is also really cool. And I'll show you this in a moment. And then along from here, we have some images, different assets. We have like a logo here, some icons and some patterns. So this is kind of our content assets window. And if I just grab something and just drag it into the scene, you can see I can place this on the 3D plane. Dimension does its thing. There we go. So we now have a can. And if you do any 3D, you'll be familiar with these different handles. You can use these to pull it and move it in all different directions. If you do mess up the camera and you need to kind of go back, just go up to the top, go to camera, camera undo. Not that I've moved the camera yet. So if I were to spin it around, for example, and think, actually, that's really not quite what I want, you can undo that camera movement. So that's one of the main differences between the undo feature up here, like edit undo. We're all used to that, edit undo. That undoes like an action in Dimension. If you move the camera, you need to do the camera undo or camera redo. So it takes a bit of getting used to, but the two different things. You can undo an action or you can undo a camera movement. So we have our can, you can see over here, we have the scene. So the environment, I can click on that and I get a bunch of different options. I can click on the camera and I can adjust a few things here. And then I have the beverage can. So this is what I imported from this panel here. And there's a few actions here. So I could delete this, for example. I could duplicate it. I can move it to the ground. So I moved it up at the beginning when I was messing around. I can click on this and it sets it back to the ground plane, which is really helpful. Or we've got another one here, group. So I can start grouping assets. So some of this is very familiar and very similar to other apps like Photoshop, XD. And I can choose which point I pivot around here. And of course I can change all of these different options from here as well. So I could hover over these different X, Y, and Z options. And I can click and drag, or I can enter a value. So very similar, like I say, to a lot of other apps. Now, contained within each model is going to be different pieces. So we've got the pull ring, that's here on the top. We've got the liquid, so the condensation on the outside of the can. And then we have the can itself. And you can see each of these are listed within the folder for the model. And I can double click on these to go inside them. So here I've got pull ring material and can material. So what I could do is I could now go back over here and I could navigate along to materials. So we could have a glass can material. I can drag this onto the can here and you can see it looks something like this. I can just zoom in using the scroll wheel on my mouse. Now, it doesn't look great because glass is something that's quite difficult to render, but this is just a preview. When you render the final version, glass looks awesome. It really is awesome. So you can click on this and you can see the small render preview there. It'll try and render it as fast as it can, and it depends on the power of your computer. And you can increase the size of that. You can see it rendering in real time as I work. So it's kind of doing its thing. That looks a lot better, like glass plus water condensation, just amazing. But when you actually fully render it out properly, it will look super cool. So you can just make that really, really small or have it larger. So you can have it there kind of while you work to see how it will look. But I'm going to close this down anyway. So I'm not going to use glass, so I'm going to go to edit and undo. And I think instead I'll use maybe aluminium, so I'll drag that to the can material. And then I can select aluminium here, and I can go and change the base color. Oh, look at this. So you can scrub through. Let's pick a color, something like this, and I can always change this. And then with this still selected, I can adjust the opacity of this material, this aluminium. I can change how metallic it is, of course. Aluminium being a metal, it's going to be really metallic. I can adjust the glow, and there's other options down here as well. So we have translucence. So you can mess around with this if you really want to, but we'll leave that there for now. So these are the materials. You can try lots of different ones out. You can try a gold can if you like. And if I navigate along one more, we've got lighting. Now this is super cool. So if I just click anywhere in here to deselect everything, just so I don't kind of get these droplets coming up. I can click on the different types of lighting and it will adjust the lighting in the scene. And you get a little preview here as well. There we go, so some slightly warmer lighting. Some of these look quite strange, some look awesome. There's one down here that, yeah, it's like a nightclub. This is so cool. Ah, okay, so lots of different types of lighting. I could sit around and play with this forever. So this looks pretty cool. Okay, I'll go with this one for now, but you know, have fun with this. It's tons of fun to mess around with. And we could navigate along here as well. And again, you can import some more assets from Adobe stock if you want. So we've got a few different scenes here, some example graphics and logos and things. What I'm going to do is grab this scene of a table and just drag it in. And what this is applied to is the environment up here. So in the scene panel, you can see this is applied as a background image. And what I can do is I can click match image. So if I click this, I can choose what is specifically going to be matched to the image. So I'm going to leave everything checked, click OK. And there you go. You can see it very cleverly understands the photo, the scene, and it tries to map the angle of the 3D model to the scene, and it adjusts everything to work. And this is pretty crazy. This is pretty cool. So we've got environment selected, and I can adjust the intensity of the environmental light. I can adjust the rotation of the environmental light. I can check colorize and pick a color. If I would like the environmental light to be a certain color, so we'll just undo that. And then again, more options down here. So just, if you see these panels collapsed, just expand them out. Now I can adjust the sunlight, so I can make this like super intense. I can make it a lot harsher, or I can have the cloudiness up so it's a little bit softer. I can adjust the height, and you can see as I'm adjusting the height of the light, so the sunlight, the shadow is changing as well to match. So I could have something like this. There we go. So as you adjust light, shadows, and everything else adjusts as well in real time. Or I could adjust the rotation. So which direction is the sun coming from? And again, you can see that shadow rotating around, and I could even colorize this as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the sun. I could have like a blue light added to this can. And then ground plane, I can control the shadow and reflections and things as well. So lots and lots of fun to be had there. That's by clicking on environment in the scene panel. I can also click on camera. In fact, I'll come back to that because I can adjust a few things like field of view and focus here. So we will come back to camera. But at the moment, I want to add my own graphic. So if I double click on can, and we'll go to aluminium, there's a few different ways that you can do this. I could go to the plus icon here, and I could go to import your content, or you could pick something else if you've got a library or you want to get some assets from Adobe stock. So I can go to import my content and I could pick what I would like. So I could go place graphic on model. That's one way. I can also go to file, down to import, and you've got the same options there again. Or I can just click on aluminium in the scene. So this is within the can group. And I've got some actions here. And this is contextual as well. So whatever I click on, it will show me a relevant set of actions. So I can click on this, place graphic on model. It's the only one available. And I've got my label prepared. This was an Illustrator vector graphic that I popped into Photoshop and just exported it as a transparent PNG. So this graphic has transparency, and I can open it and it will place it onto the can. And you can see actually it has all the lighting effects applied to it as well. So the text and the skull and the wings are actually white, but because I had that blue light, it's kind of applied all of that to the graphic. So I could go back to environment and I could maybe change this and see how it affects the color of my graphic as well. So maybe I could go for something a bit more like this, so it's not changing it as much. And then I can go back into the can, select the graphic, and I can adjust properties on the graphic as well. So I could maybe just drop that opacity a tiny bit. I could make it more metallic to kind of match with the metallic aesthetic of the can. I can adjust the roughness. And you can do this all in real time, adjusting these previews until you get something you're happy with. So maybe I could go back in and maybe make this like darker and change the color. Like this is so cool. There we go. Outlaw whiskey in a can. Fantastic. So we've got lots of cool assets and everything. I'm just going to close this panel now. But something I haven't talked about is how to actually navigate this workspace. So we've created a can, but we're still facing with the camera from the same direction. So on the left here, we've got all these different tools. We've got the select and move tool. So we can select different groups and different objects within groups, and we can move all of those around independently. Underneath that, we've got the select and scale tool. So I could scale this here along the y-axis. You can see, of course, that looks terrible. So I could scale it along this axis. Again, of course, that looks terrible. Some of these 2D models will scale better than others. But as I'm scaling, and as with many other Adobe apps, I could hold Shift, do the scaling, and it will scale it proportionally. So just hold Shift, and everything will stay in proportion. Now under scaling, we have the select and rotate tool, and you can see all the tooltips pop up with the shortcuts. So I can rotate this around different axes, and again, I can hold Shift, and it will rotate in like set increments. So there we go, it snaps to 90 degrees there, 45 degrees there. So depending on your scene, if you don't have a surface or whatever, you might find the rotate tool a bit more useful. That's quite useful there, being able to spin it around so I can get the exact angle that I want. Might want it slightly off center. But with the surface, we don't really want to rotate it through the floor. But there we go, that's the rotate tool. I'm not really going to cover Magic Wand and Eyedropper Tool in this video because that's just a little bit more complicated. You don't really need to know that. Eyedropper Tool functions very similarly to how it does in some of the other Adobe apps. That you can click and it like samples a particular point, and you can see that there. So if we go down here, these are the main three navigation tools. And there is another one down here, Horizon Tool, but I'm not really going to focus too much on that one as well. So these are the main three. We've got Orbit, Pan, and Dolly. And the shortcut keys for these are 1, 2, 3. So nice and easy to remember, and you can easily switch between them. So if I just press 1 on the keyboard, you can see the cursor changes to the orbit icon, and I can just freely orbit the camera all the way around. Now I can also do this by just having any other tool selected, right-clicking and using that instead. So that's a really quick way to do it if you don't want to use the numbers 1, 2, and 3 to switch to that tool specifically. So next we have number 2, that is the pan tool or the move tool. I can move this around. And you can also do this by pressing down your middle mouse button if you are using a mouse, by the way. So if you're using a mouse, press down the middle mouse button and keep it held and move around. That's like the shortcut for activating the move tool. And then number 3, we have the Dolly tool. So imagine you have a camera, the camera's on a tripod. The tripod has wheels, okay? And you can move that tripod on wheels closer or further away from the can or the subject. That's the Dolly camera. And again, if you have a mouse, you can use the scrolly wheel in the middle to zoom in or out with the Dolly camera. So those are the 3 main tools for kind of orbiting and navigating around your 3D space. So we've got orbit, pan or move, and then Dolly. And then of course we've got zoom and the hand tool, if you're familiar with this as well. So you can select the hand tool, or you can just hold down space, click and drag, and you can move your actual workspace. So that's the differences between like panning. Think of it like an artboard. You're panning around your artboard and your workspace, but then using these tools to navigate within that 3D space. If that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So there we go. We've covered a lot of the tools. There's definitely a few more things to cover. Up here, you can lock and unlock, hide and show layers. But I'll leave you to explore and experiment with those options. And you can see already we've created a can that looks pretty cool. We've put it into a scene. We've got some lighting that's realistic, and you can add more products as well, more 3D models into the same space. And one thing I did say I was going to come back to is the camera. So you may have a second product further back, for example. What you can actually do is you can check this. It says focus. You can like adjust the blur amount, and you can click set focus point. So I could click here. I've set the focus, and then I can adjust it. So if I bring it up ever so slightly, so it's like using a camera with a really wide aperture, like an f1.8 or something. So this part here is in focus. And then as the can curves around, these curved edges start to blur as if you were taking a real photograph. And you can also adjust the camera's perspective, the field of view, and then you've got other position settings there for the camera as well. And once you've done everything and you're like, okay, great, I've created my 3D model, I've added my graphics, I've created my scene, my lighting, you are completely done. The last thing to do is to render it out. Now again, as I say, depending on the power of your computer, this will take a varying amount of time. And you just switch over to render at the top. So we go from design mode to render. And then what we can do is we can give this a file name. So I can type in tutorial. You can choose if you'd like to render it fast or at a medium speed or slightly slower. And of course you can see the corresponding quality as well. So if you want the best image, go for high quality. It will take longer, but it will look better. If you want to just render it out really quickly, just to kind of see how it looks when it's actually rendered, and the preview maybe just isn't enough, just do like a really, really quick one to see how it looks before committing to the higher quality, slower render. And you can choose what formats you'd like to export. So you could have a PSD with 16 bits per channel, which is like super high quality, or you could just have a PNG, so you can pick and choose which formats you'd like, click render, and then it will start rendering, and you'll see it kind of changing on screen as it renders all the lighting effects and everything onto the material surface. And then you'll get a render status down there. And then once it's done, it will appear wherever you've set that to render with your location here. So there we go. There's a quick look at Adobe Dimension. Hopefully this is a helpful overview, but as always, if you've got any questions about anything we covered in this video, please do drop those down below. But as always, like this video if you enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
You're a rebel.